Hello, I'm Yosu Franco, Strategy and Technology Advisor for WATCHGUARD Technologies. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about one of the most attacked vectors today in cybersecurity, which is the human element or the human factor. There is no clear definition in the industry of what it is. So in this presentation, I'm going to try to bring some clarity and propose a definition for the human factor. We're going to see what is the impact of this vector in cybersecurity incidents today. We're going to try to understand why it is becoming even more important. And finally, we're going to try to explain what measures can we take to mitigate this risk. It seems that no matter how much technology we throw into the problem, there will always be someone who does the wrong thing or who abuses company policy. And the problem at the end is human nature. I love this quote from a scientist called Edward Osborne Wilson, who said that the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies, and that it is becoming terrifically dangerous, and it is approaching a point of crisis overall. The reality is that the human element will not evolve nearly as fast as technology, so that it is becoming faster, easier, and cheaper to exploit this human element using these godlike technologies. But first, let's try to find what is exactly the human factor. And when I was doing some research, I thought that we had to try to define it in a way that would allow us to track the progress we're making. So I went and used what I consider to be one of the best resources out there to analyze cybersecurity incidents, which is the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. This is a report that gets published every year with the participations of many private and public organizations and which compiles data for many security incidents. In the 2020 edition, which is the one I used, they tracked data for over 32,000 cybersecurity incidents and for almost 4,000 confirmed data breaches. Now, in order to make some sense out of the data that they compile, they need to use a shared language. And this is called VERIS. Is the vocabulary for event recording and sharing. So with VERIS, all the data that is sent by every participating institution has already a lot of attributes, a lot of information about every incident that they track. So if we look at the schema that the VERIS framework uses, we can see that there are certain components like incident tracking, victim demographics, incident description, discovery and response, and impact assessment. For our purposes, we're going to choose incident description. And within incident description, we have actors, actions, assets, and attributes. So we're going to go for actions. And here we're getting closer to our purpose because here we have 7 categories of actions: malware, hacking, social, misuse, physical, error, and environmental. So I chose social, misuse, and error to try to build our definition. So what is social? Social tactics are the ones that employ deception, manipulation, intimidation to exploit the human element of information assets. So things like phishing, for instance, which we all know, or pretexting, which is impersonating someone to make victims do things or to fool them into doing things that they wouldn't do otherwise. Misuse is the use of entrusted organizational resources for any purpose contrary to that which was intended. And this is typically administrative abuses, privilege abuse, policy violations, unapproved workarounds, etc. And finally, we have error, which is a broad concept which includes anything done or not done incorrectly or inadvertently. This includes, for instance, misconfigurations, which are becoming a serious problem, misdelivery, publishing errors, etc. So with these components, I've built the following definition. So the human factor would be those unsecured behaviors made by those entrusted with organizational IT resources due to social tactics, to misuse, or to error. Now, with this definition in mind, and looking back at the data breach investigations report, we can see what actually the impact of this human element is in cybersecurity incidents. So if we look at the statistics, we can see that actually the three elements of the human factor, social, error, and misuse, account for more than half of all the data breaches that were tracked in the report. So it is actually the main factor in the majority of the breaches. It approaches actually 60% according to this report. Now, if we look at the two most important components of it, first, error is becoming even more important, is becoming as important or as serious as social breaches, and now it is more common than malware. And this is true for all industry. Again, misconfigurations due to the more complexity of the IT systems and IT architectures, it will probably become more important in the future. The other important component of the social factor, which is social, which we all know, phishing being the top element here. And the reality here is that if we have a sufficiently large number of people in an organization, it is very difficult to bring down the click rate, the percentage of people who at one point will be fooled or will click on the link they shouldn't be clicking. According to this edition of the report, the average click rate for phishing campaigns stays at 3.4%, which is, by the way, the lowest in years, but which will be, I believe, very hard to bring it down. The other rising component of the social factor, it is pretexting, mostly business email compromise, or as they call it, financially motivated social engineering, which is seeing a large increase in the last 2 years. So what the future will bring? Well, according to some analysts, and this is from Gartner, by 2025, more than 85% of successful attacks against user endpoints will exploit configuration and user errors rather than make use of advanced malware. And why is this? It's because more and more attack surface for the attackers will be reduced due to the built-in features, security features even, that will become part of the operating system, and on the overall approach that many companies are using, for instance, to deny execution to applications that are not trusted, much like what happens with our smartphones, in which every application that we install from an official store will be pre-authorized or will be validated first by the manufacturer, by the vendor of the smartphone. So I think the same is going to happen also in corporate endpoints. So what is left for the attackers? Well, they will always have vulnerabilities and the user error, or the human factor, as we are saying. Why is this? Well, first is it will keep a receiving focus from the attackers. They can get predictable results. The attackers operate an industry, and they follow also some business logic and business rules. So if they know that the average click rate in a phishing campaign is going to stay between 3 and 4%, they can more or less predict the outcome. So next reason for this higher impact of the human element will be also the evolution of social engineering. There is way more open source intelligence than ever before. If we look at the amount of data about a person, about an individual that we can get by combining publicly available information, let's say from LinkedIn, from Twitter, and from Facebook, the level of detail or the profile that we can build about a person is really astounding. And they're going to keep leveraging that. More sophisticated and clever deception and manipulation techniques. And I'm not only referring to these deepfake algorithms, which are going to become easier and cheaper to use, but to other creative ways in which attackers are working. I love this example. This is a banner for smartphones. And if you look at the banner itself, there are a few pixels there that look like a little bit of dirt. Actually, those pixels were part of the banner, where it was designed that way, so that when the user would receive this banner on the phone, the first thing they would do would be to scratch the surface of the phone, to start to scratch the screen, of the phone, trying to remove that dirt, when in fact they were actually clicking on the banner itself. So a very clever way to make people do things that they didn't really want to do. As I said earlier, there is more complexity today in the IT systems, in the controls that the average organization needs to use. And that means more probability of errors and misconfigurations. And at the end, I'd say that the simple explanation is that it will always be easier to find new vulnerable humans rather than new software vulnerabilities. So, can we fix this? Well, I'm a big believer in technology to solve problems. I think that technology will become better at identifying this type of attacks as well. But it will be very hard, if not impossible, to completely eliminate the problem. And one thing that in cybersecurity we need to do is to look for better analysis of root causes. Now, in other industries, they're doing this. There is a human factors analysis and classification system, for instance, that is used in a variety of industries. This framework started in the aviation industry in the United States in the 90s. It was started by the US Navy, which was having a higher rate of aviation incidents. So, of course, in aviation, whenever there is an incident, there is a high probability of loss of life. So they were trying to identify where were the root causes of those incidents to try to mitigate those risks. And they work on a framework based on 4 levels of failure. First, we have the unsafe acts themselves. At the bottom of the graphic there, you see errors and you see violations. And if you think about it, it is very similar to the components that we've been describing for the human factor in cybersecurity. We have perceptual errors. We have violations of policies. We have decision errors. So it could be misconfigurations, for instance. But it does not stop there, which I think what makes it very interesting. They look at the precondition for those unsafe acts. So what were the conditions of the people actually using those technologies? Were they under stress? Was communication good so that they knew exactly what they had to do? Did they have the right tools, the right technologies? Were they physically fit for the job? They also look at the supervisory factors. Were the problems being corrected? Were the known problems being corrected? In cybersecurity, we see constantly that many organizations, even though they know, for instance, that they don't have proper patching policies, for instance, they keep having problems and they don't fix them on time. And finally, there are organizational influences. What is the culture of the company regarding these human errors, this potential for problems by fooling people? So I think this is a very good framework to analyze really everything that we should be analyzing in order to really mitigate the risk. As I said, this started in aviation, but is now used in other industries, such as construction or manufacturing, mining, energy, etc. So why not in cybersecurity? There's no such a thing in cybersecurity yet, so I think there is a lot of room for improvement here. So what can we do about it? What are the technologies that we can use today to mitigate the human factor? So there are plenty of technologies. There are many things that we can do. So for instance, to mitigate the social factor, definitely we should have a security awareness training. We can have email security gateways, web security gateways that can actually deal pretty well with phishing campaigns. We can implement a zero trust approach for applications, which is what we do at WATCHGUARD, so that only trusted applications can execute. We can use multi-factor authentication, which is something that we also do at WATCHGUARD. So we can offer a very simple way to ensure that even if an attacker has access to credentials from users, if they try to access those systems, they will be confronted with another factor for authentication. So these are all technologies that are available today. What can we do about misuse or abuse of company policy? Well, definitely we should have better visibility of the activity happening at the endpoint. We can use behavior analytics, etc. About errors, we can have better configuration management for security. We can have better visibility about the processes or about the critical processes, for instance, for changing configurations, etc. So there are plenty of technologies that we can use. And I know and I realize that this can be a little bit overwhelming for most organizations. So that what we propose from WATCHGUARD, well, from WATCHGUARD, we have a very solid portfolio of solutions which go from the network all the way to the endpoint. So network security, user security, Wi-Fi security, and endpoint security, which try to bring this enterprise-grade technology under a unified platform, but implemented and managed in a very simplified way, both for users and for partners. WATCHGUARD is a company that has a 25-year history of providing these technologies to partners and to end users, so that by covering the basics with these products, you can, I would say, mitigate today more than 90% of the risk from the human factor and from other vectors of attack as well. So I hope that this presentation was interesting for you, and if you haven't done so yet, or you don't know what our products are, or you have never tested, I would encourage you to give them a try. And if you have any question about the contents of this presentation, you can always send me an email. You can see my address there. So thank you very much for your attention today.